are the top stories this hour. Israeli military jet strikes Gaza, Hamas commander killed. Japan train hits bear, leaving passengers stranded. Plus, thousands of Afghans leave Pakistan ahead of deportation deadline. Welcome to the World News on VOP TV. I'm Kayla Abraham. Now, Israeli airstrikes have hit a densely populated refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, killing at least 50 Palestinians and a Hamas commander. Meanwhile, medics struggle to treat the casualties, even setting up operating rooms and hospital corridors. Israeli tanks have been active in Gaza for at least 4 days following weeks of air bombardment in retaliation for an attack by Palestinian Hamas militants on mostly Israeli civilians on October 7 and the taking of more than 200 hostages. An Israel Defense Forces IDF statement disclosed that the strike by fighter jets in Jabalia, Gaza's largest refugee camp, had killed Ibrahim Biari. IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus stated that dozens of Hamas combatants were in the same underground tunnel complex as Biari and were also killed when it collapsed in the attack. Meanwhile, Israel has cut Gaza's telecommunications and internet services for a second time, despite humanitarian aid agencies warning that such blackouts severely disrupt their work in already dire situation in the war-torn Palestinian enclave. Telecom provider Paltel reported a complete disruption of communications and internet services in Gaza on Wednesday morning. The disruption comes after Israel imposed a near-complete communications blackout on Gaza from Friday to Sunday that lasted close to 36 hours. In a statement, the Palestinian Ministry of Communications appealed to neighboring Egypt to operate communication stations near the Gaza border and activate roaming service on Egyptian networks, stressing that the critical humanitarian situation that cannot bear the loss of communication for any longer. Now, Qatar has mediated an agreement between Egypt, Israel and Hamas in coordination with the U.S., which will allow limited evacuation from besieged Gaza. The agreement would allow foreign passport holders and some critically injured people to leave through the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza, though there is no timeline for how long it will remain open for evacuation. The deal is not linked to other issues under negotiations, such as hostages held by Hamas, the Palestinian Islamist group that governs Gaza, or pauses designed to ease a humanitarian crisis in the enclave, which is suffering from food, water, fuel, and medical shortages. Israel sent its forces into Gaza following weeks of air bombardments in retaliation for a major attack by Iran-backed Hamas on October 7. Meanwhile, Yemen's Houthi rebels, for the first time on Tuesday, claimed missile and drone attacks targeting Israel, drawing their main sponsor, Iran, closer into the ongoing Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip and further raising the risk of a regional conflict erupting. The Houthis had been suspected of an attack earlier this month targeting Israel by sending missiles and drones over the crucial shipping lane of the Red Sea, an assault that saw the U.S. Navy shoot down the projectiles. On Tuesday, Israel stated that its own fighter jets and its new Arrow missile defense system shot down 2 salvos of incoming fire hours apart as it approached the country's key Red Sea shipping port of Eilat. The Houthis, who have held Yemen's capital Sana'a since 2014 as part of the country's ruinous war, claimed 3 attacks on Israel in a later military statement, without elaborating on the time frame of the operations and whether Tuesday's salvos represented 1 or 2 attacks. Now, 8 people spent the night in an unheated train in chilly northern Japan after the vehicle hit a bear as the country grapples with a rise in bear-related incidents on Wednesday. The number of bear attacks on people is sharply higher this year, with experts blaming a poor corn harvest forcing the animals to search farther afield for food ahead of winter hibernation. Japan Railways (JP) stated that the small train on the island of Hokkaido collided with a 1.8-meter tall bear in the city of Furano at around midnight on Monday. The accident put the train out of action, and those on board were advised not to leave until hunters arrived to check there were no other bears. Hokkaido stated that with the hunters not allowed to open fire at night, passengers had to wait until dawn. The company also stated that once the sun rose, the bear was found dead and removed by rail employees under the guidance of hunters. Now, Pakistan is set to begin its push to force out 1.7 million migrants, many of them Afghans who fled the Taliban despite criticism for human rights groups. Thousands of Afghans living in Pakistan rushed to the border in trucks and buses ahead of the government's Wednesday deadline for undocumented or unregistered foreign nationals to leave the country. The anti-migrant policy was announced last month by Pakistan's caretaker government, which has threatened to round up, detain and deport those who do not leave voluntarily. Islamabad has blamed Afghan migrants for a rise in armed attacks, mainly in northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and southwestern Balochistan provinces bordering Afghanistan. However, the move to expel migrants has been strongly criticized by UN agencies and human rights groups as well as the Taliban-led administration in Afghanistan. Now, North Korea has shuttered its embassy in Spain following announcements earlier this week that it was closing 2 diplomatic missions in Africa. This was as reports swirled that the regime is suffering from the impact of international sanctions. Pyongyang also announced the closure of its Spanish embassy in a note verbally shared on the website of the Communist Party of the Peoples of Spain, or PCPE. The note, originally dated October 26, noted that the North Korean mission in Italy would handle matters with Spain going forward. In a separate commentary, the PCPE disclosed that it had received information from the North Korean embassy that it was closing due to the impossibility of being able to develop mutually beneficial relations with institutions, commercial and cultural entities by the application of the sanctions that North American imperialism imposes. Now, the U.S. Treasury Department stated that the U.S. on Tuesday imposed a form of sanctions on Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, MOGE. However, it stopped short of imposing full blocking sanctions on the ruling junta's main source of foreign revenue. The Treasury also disclosed in a statement that the action prohibits certain financial services by Americans to the state oil and gas enterprise starting on December 15 in the forced direct action against the state-owned enterprise. Washington has previously targeted its leadership, and as well, financial services include loans, accounts, insurance, investment, and other services. Washington also held back from adding the enterprise to the specially designated nationals list, which would effectively kick it out of the U.S. banking system, ban its trade with Americans, and freeze its American accent. Now, French President has arrived in Kazakhstan on Wednesday on his first official visit to the Central Asian country. The Kazakh Presidential Press Service disclosed in a statement that the Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, Ali Smilov, welcomed Emmanuel Macron at the capital Astana's airport, expressing confidence that the visit will bolster the bilateral strategic partnership. The French head of state then met with Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev at his residence accord there, where a greeting ceremony was held. The two leaders shook hands, introduced their ministers, and listened to the national anthems. Macron's office earlier announced that the two presidents plan to address international and regional issues and prospects for strengthening economic ties between the two countries, in particular the development of trade and investment and cooperation in the energy sector. After Kazakhstan, Macron, together with ministers and heads of large corporations, will visit Uzbekistan. Now, Sudan's army leader has visited troops in 2 strategic bases in the capital, Khartoum, and the twin city of Omdurman, following battleground losses to rivals from the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF) over the past week. Now, state-run TV broadcast Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan inspection of troops in Wadi Saidna base in Omdurman and Karari base in Khartoum on Tuesday. Burhan downplayed RSF's claims of seizing 3 army headquarters in the war-torn Darfur region, receiving hundreds of alleged defected soldiers, including in Khartoum, and capturing the airport in West Kordofan since 26 October. But Burhan states that the army is committed to talks in Jeddah to end the war that erupted in mid-April. The army had earlier disclosed it was forced to withdraw from Nyala, the capital of South Darfur state, due to shortage of supplies. Saudi Arabia, the US, and the African Union, AU, and the Trade Bloc Intergovernmental Authority on Development are leading Sudan's mediation efforts. Now, a junior Navy officer named by the Gambia's government as the mastermind of a forward coup plot in December last year has been found guilty of treason and sentenced to 12 years in prison. A high court on Tuesday ruled that Lance Corporal Sana Fadera planned and attempted to unlawfully overthrow the democratically elected government of President Adama Barrow. Authorities had charged Fadera and 7 other soldiers with treason, conspiracy, and inciting mutiny for their alleged role in the 2022 coup attempt. The court acquitted 3 other military officers on Tuesday. Another soldier has been on the run since a forward coup attempt and is considered a fugitive. The court also acquitted a police officer and 2 civilians who had been charged with concealing treason and conspired to commit felony. Before President Barrow came to power, the West African country was governed for 2 decades by Yahya Jammeh, who seized power in a coup in 1994 and forwarded several attempts to overthrow him before he lost the 2016 elections. Now, Mali's Tuareg rebels reveals that they have taken over a base in the northern city of Kidal, vacated by the UN peacekeepers on Tuesday. The UN mission in Mali, MINUSMA, stated that it's ended its presence in Kidal in a hurry after its last convoy of peacekeepers suffered 2 explosive attacks on the way to Gao, another key town in the north. The Tuareg coalition claimed victory on social media, stating it was in control of the Kidal base. A local official told reporters that the rebels occupied the camp immediately after it was evacuated by the UN mission. It was the 3rd and the last camp to be evacuated by the mission in the Kidal region, which has been hit by jihadist and separatist violence. The other 2 camps were Tessalit and Aguahog. The separatist groups, which had earlier agreed to a ceasefire with authorities, have recently resumed hostilities in the area. They oppose peacekeepers handing over the camps to the Malian army. Mali's military government has demanded by the UN that the UN force leave the country by the end of the year, saying its decade-long mission against Islamist militants had failed. Now, a Ugandan court has ordered a U.S. couple charged with torturing their foster child to pay him $26,000 as compensation. The compensation resulted from a plea deal, which also led to the court dropping the charges of aggravated trafficking and torture against the couple, which could have seen them receive life imprisonment or death penalty. The couple, Nicholas and Mackenzie Spencer, were arrested last year and charged with torturing the 10-year-old boy over 2 years. This is after the child's nanny filed a police report alleging that the couple repeatedly subjected the child to inhumane treatment. On Tuesday, they pleaded guilty to the charges of cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment, working without permits, and staying in Uganda unlawfully, for which they were fined 4.86 million Ugandan shillings. But Tuesday's ruling has angered child rights activists who termed it a mockery of justice. Court documents show that the couple served the child cold food, made him sleep on bare wooden platform without bedding, and forced him to squat in an awkward position. Now, Britain's King Charles III and Queen Camilla began the 2nd day of a state visit to Kenya on Wednesday as survivors of colonial-era abuses criticized his failure to issue a full apology or propose reparations. At a state dinner on Tuesday, Charles expressed his deepest regret for what he called abhorrent and unjustifiable act of violence committed against Kenyans during the country's independence struggle. President William Ruto commended the monarch's first step toward going beyond the tentative and equivocal half measures of past years, revealing much remained to be done. Charles's visit comes at a time when former colonies are demanding that Britain do more to recognize the abuses of its colonial past. Some, notably Barbados and Jamaica, have been re-evaluating their ties to the monarchy. Britain agreed to a $24 million out-of-court settlement in 2013 to more than 5,200 survivors of abuses during the Myanmar conflict, but it has refused to issue an apology and have rebuffed claims by other communities. Meanwhile, Kenyans have protested a directive by the revenue authorities seeking to tax personal or household items worth $500 and above from visiting tourists and citizens returning to the country. The Kenyan Revenue Authority (KRA) states that all goods, whether new or used over that amount are subject to taxation. The directive has sparked a public outcry, with many Kenyans saying that the move would scare away tourists. A section of members of parliament disclosed that some KRA officials have been taking advantage of the directive to harass tourists, giving the country bad publicity. Tourism Minister Alfred Mutua disclosed the KRA move as one of the reasons the number of tourists visiting the country has been declining. It is the latest in a series of new taxes introduced by President William Ruto's government, blamed on the worsening the cost of living in the country. This is even though Ruto won elections last year with a promise to ease the financial difficulties of families. Now, the U.S. discloses that it will reinstate Mauritania's benefit under the African Growth and Opportunity Act (AGOA) program following an eligibility review. The U.S. Trade Office states that the reinstatement will be done in January next year after the Northwest African country made substantial and measurable progress on worker rights and eliminating forced labor. The trade benefits were suspended in 2019 following concerns over workers' rights violations in Mauritania. Mauritania's reinstatement follows U.S. President Joe Biden's announcement on Tuesday to terminate the AGOA benefits for Gabon, Niger, Uganda, and the Central African Republic (CAR). The U.S. revealed that Gabon and Niger AGOA's eligibility were terminated because of unconstitutional government changes after coups, while Uganda's and CAR benefits were terminated based on human rights violations perpetrated by those governments. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea have all previously been expelled from AGOA after military coups in those countries. Mauritania's economy is dominated by extractive industries, mainly oil and minerals, which account for over three-quarters of export. Fisheries, animals, and plant farming also contribute a huge percentage to the government's revenues. The U.S. to Africa Trade Program, introduced in 2000, gives eligible sub-Saharan African countries duty-free access to the U.S. for more than 1,800 products. And that's it on the World News and VOP TV. I'm Kayla Abraham. A VOP Business Show is coming up next.